So, good morning, and welcome again to all of you in different parts of the world who are sharing this Holy Week retreat with us on Bere Island. Another beautiful day. And today is it's Holy Thursday. It's the beginning of the great 3 days, the Triduum of the Easter mysteries. In the ancient world, the mystery religions were often conducted around great feasts, and they involved the induction or initiation into the deeper mysteries of the universe through rituals and secret mysteries. And the Christian mysteries, the Easter mysteries, are not secret in that way, but the word mysterion can also be translated as mystery. So there is something that is like an open secret. It's there, but we have to see it, and we have to recognize it and respond to it. And so if you have celebrated these holy days many times over many years, they have a certain familiarity. But at the same time, every year there's something more to learn. There's a new layer in ourselves to be activated and awakened by it. And I think as we've been preparing for these 3 days religiously through the season of Lent, it feels a bit like an exam. You know, you've been revising hard for an exam, and now the day of the exam has come. May not be the best analogy, but it does suggest that we will get out of these 3 days as much, in a sense, as we put into them. We're not passive recipients of information during the celebration of Holy Week and of these 3 days. We're not just going in there getting something, and it doesn't matter how we are, how we resonate with and respond to. We have to be tuned in, we have to be alert, we have to be sensitized. So, you know, a lot will depend upon how well prepared we are. But having said that, this is also a time of grace. It's not just a matter of doing your revision and feeling confident that you have all the information you need to pass the exam. The deepest dynamic of these days is gift, is grace, something that cannot be reduced to a technique, something in a sense that cannot even be prepared for, but always takes us by surprise. But maybe we have to be prepared to be surprised, and that means we have to perhaps have let down some of our defenses, relaxed a little mentally and even physically, so that we're sensitive and receptive, but also finely tuned. So these days are holy days, and we never quite know how they're going to teach us. Today is Holy Thursday, and the main story of the day is, of course, the Last Supper, which we celebrate symbolically at Mass this evening, in the Mass of the Lord's Supper, It's the initiation or the inauguration of the Eucharist, the communion, which is central, one of the most central signs of Christian fellowship and Christian worship, of course. So let's begin by reflecting a little bit on what the Eucharist means, and what the Last Supper really was about, and how and if we feel connected to it. The commemoration of the Last Supper is, I think, recognized in some form in every Christian denomination, but celebrated or observed in many different ways. And in the Catholic tradition, there's a very strong emphasis upon the Mass, even upon daily Mass. That hasn't always been the case. Even St. Benedict didn't have daily Mass, but it would certainly have had the celebration of the Eucharist would have been central to the life of the early Church. But over the centuries in the Catholic tradition, it became more and more central, and sometimes became so important that it overshadowed or blocked out its own real meaning, because it isolated itself from other aspects of the Christian life, such as meditation and contemplative journey. So the Eucharist, which is at the same time one of the great unifying symbols of Christian life, has also been one of the great sources of division and misunderstanding. And it's a sensitive area still today for Christians to approach each other through, and for people who are not in the household of the faith, for the non-Christian, the Eucharist may seem completely, not just mysterious, but mystifying, completely incomprehensible, and they may see it only as a kind of a social ritual, something you do in the village church or in your suburban parish, really just as a sort of a local community building exercise. So we, even us here and those taking part in the retreat, probably cover a very wide range of response to the meaning of the Eucharist. And I think we just have to say it's there. It's there in the Scripture, and we have to understand it, and we have to understand it through some kind of practice. We won't understand it just by thinking about it. So let's explore it a little bit and see where it takes us. During supper, Jesus took bread, and having said the blessing, he broke it and gave it to the disciples with the words, "Take this and eat. This is my body." Then he took a cup, and having offered thanks to God, he gave it to them with the words, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood, the blood of the covenant, shed for many for the forgiveness of sins." Then he concludes, "I tell you, never again shall I drink from the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in the kingdom of my Father." Well, it's a very intense moment, and there's no explanation in the text of what it means. And the reason there's no explanation, I think, is because the people for whom it was written were already a Eucharistic community. They were already celebrating the Eucharist. and long time before the Gospels were written down. So it was part of their life and part of what was building up their experience of community. And so these words, it seems, were passed on. We use basically the same words in the words of consecration at the heart of any communion service. Today, this is my body, this is my blood. However, whether you're saying High Mass for the funeral of a Pope in St. Peter's, or if you're celebrating Mass in a little village in the Amazon, or wherever you may be, the essential moment of the mystical moment, in a sense, is the utterance of those words. Now, you could focus so much upon that mystical reality that you forget what it is part of, what is happening in the community as it celebrates the Mass. Our word in English, hocus pocus, comes from a corruption of the Latin, hoc est corpus meo. This is my body. So you could turn all of this into hocus pocus. If you focus so much on it, its mystical aspect, that you lose the incarnational aspect, or you forget, perhaps we could say, that the incarnational aspect and the mystical aspect are the same. Anyway, we need to reflect on it, and we also have to be able to celebrate this memorial, this living memorial, that makes this moment, historical moment, present to us, that makes us present to it. We have to celebrate it in order to understand it. To celebrate it, you have to go into it, at the least, with an open heart. When we were watching last night a speech by Leonard Cohen when he was accepting a poetry award in Spain, and he said, I feel a little bit inauthentic receiving an award for poetry, because poetry comes from a place which I and no one else can control. If we could control it, he said, I would go there more often and write more poems, or better poems. And I think that is a way into understanding what we're talking about today. The poet puts his name to his poem, but in what sense is it his poem? If it's a good poem, and not just a piece of doggerel, or not just a piece of moralizing, but if it really is a poem that captures and conveys something vivid and subtle and original, if it is a real creation, the word poesis has the sense of making something. So if it's something new that's been made, in what sense can we say that it belongs to the poet? As soon as it's written and shared, it goes out into the sort of the public domain, and everybody reads it in their own way. Critics interpret it very differently, and if it's a poem that lasts, or a body of work that lasts, then it builds up layer after layer of meaning and interpretation. It becomes part of the culture. It's like when you read the play of Shakespeare, you realize how many phrases and metaphors Shakespeare has poured into the English language. We use them every day. without realizing them. So, in what sense is it Shakespeare's play anymore? You could say it's Shakespeare's play or Leonard Cohen's poem, but it's not the same as saying this is his car or this his house, or even this is his wife or his children. The possessive pronoun here has taken on a different significance because of the nature of the thing created or the thing communicated. The act of communication is the act of creation. So something strange and mysterious becomes present in the my, or the his, or the yours, something that is intimate, but at the same time kind of impersonal. This is my body, this is my blood. Any act of creation that arises from a place of purity is not being filtered, it's not just entertainment, it's not just commercial. But a real act of creation is identical with the being of the Creator. This is why Leonard Cohen says, I don't know where my poetry comes from. It comes from within me, but from a place that I do not know, that I cannot control. You know, we can control what we wear, we can control our, forms of work, we can control what we give or share with other people up to a point. But from this place, where the act of creation arises, we have no control. So that, in other words, it must be way beyond the reach of the ego. The ego is what controls us. We look in the mirror in the morning, we say, what do I look like? Is this what I should look like today? Do people like what I look like today? So the ego is controlling that. But there is a much deeper, simpler, purer place in us where we don't have control and where we don't even have to worry about our image or the judgment that other people make about us. We know that through meditation. We probably know that this is the place we go to. We have to battle our way through some thick undergrowth of the ego to get there. But little by little we find ourselves in that place, and we find that we can live from that place in daily life more freely, more generously, with less anxiety about controlling everything, with less fear about what other people are going to say, so with a greater liberty of spirit. And we know, we feel, we connect this with the practice of meditation, which takes us to this place of being. So can we ever know that? Can we ever really know that place from which the poem arises, or that place from which Jesus is speaking when he says, "This is my body, which I give to you"? The philosopher Kant said that the ordinary human being, the subjective human being, can never know what he called the noumena of an object. And by that he meant you can never really know what it is in itself. you can only know it from its phenomenological aspect. In other words, what it looks like on the outside and the effect it has on you. That's how normally we see things and know things. The body is a good example of it. We know a person, we recognize them because they have the same body, more or less, that they had the day before. So we go up to them and we say, "Hello, Peter, how are you? Did you sleep well last night?" That the form, the phenomena of their existence is recognizable. And their body will say, if you look at them and you say they look very tired, or they cut their head or something, you will say there's a little difference in you. What happened? So we'll know a little bit about what's going on. We might see, we say, you look a bit sad today. Is everything okay? But we're still interpreting the person through the phenomena. And the phenomena, the outward appearance, is a manifestation, we feel, of the real person. Or the person, it's not that the body is fake, or that the body is misleading us, that the body really cannot lie to us. Body is, we may try to make the body look or act differently from the truth, but the body always tells the truth. But it's that the body doesn't, the physical, phenomenological form of the self that is the body, doesn't give the whole picture of who I am. And we all know that. It doesn't mean the body is unimportant, because this is the primary way we have of connecting, unless you go for a virtual reality. But, I think we would all prefer to meet a real person, touch a real person, than just be in email contact with them for the whole of our life. So, just apply this then to the deepest level of being, which is God. We cannot know God in himself, to use an inevitable pronoun. The fact that we have to say himself is a sign that we cannot know God in himself or itself or herself. How can the finite know the infinite? That's one of the oldest theological, philosophical problems in our thinking about God. How can we know God, who is so different, who is the source of our being, and who is infinite? Well, the response to that question is quite simple. You have to be changed. You can know God, but only if you become God, or if you are divinized. If a transformation takes place in you, that allows you to know God co-naturally, or because you are, in that sense, the same. You can only know, really, what we are very similar to. We recognize each other as human beings, not as horses or cattle. We can recognize a cattle because a cattle has a body and it's similar. But we cannot imagine a form of life that is utterly different from every form of life that we are familiar with. So we fantasize about extraterrestrial beings with other kinds of body, and usually they look pretty much like us, except they're much thinner, or they have antennae coming out of their heads, or they're green. But they usually have 2 eyes, a mouth, and 2 legs, and they look pretty much like human being that's been put through some kind of Photoshop. So we can only really know what we are like, what we have some intrinsic similarity to. So we can only know God because there is a God-likeness in us. Only if we are changed can we fully enter into the goal, the destiny, the meaning of human existence, which the Christian tradition tells us is to know, love, and be with God, to see God, beatific vision. And this, last night we were talking about the gift of self. Well, this is what the gift of self does. It changes us. In human relationships, in some human relationships, where we feel that we are being offered the gift of another person's self, it changes us. It makes a relationship and it changes the relationship. And that gift of self may begin, it's an ongoing process. It's not like signing a contract and, just saying, I give you myself for 3 months. It's an ongoing process. We are changed both as the giver and as the receiver in that process. It's what's called fidelity. It's faithful relationships. It may or may not be intimate. Well, it is always intimate, but it has many, many levels, many kinds of intimacy. And even in the most intimate sexual forms of the gift of self, that way of giving oneself may be very strong at the beginning, and it may continue, doesn't always, but it may continue to be an important part of the relationship. But other levels and dimensions of this exchange of self become opened up and activated over time. So we are changed by the gift of self. It lifts us up out of our usual limited existence into a quite different way of being. The first example of this, early in your life, maybe you discover that you can fall in love. And you do fall in love. You might get addicted to falling in love for a while. And you realize that you can live at a different level of intensity and clarity and vitality. You can live differently because of this exchange of self that happens at a certain level anyway, even in that early stages of romantic love. It's a new life. It's a new life. And we think of the Eucharist as the sharing of the life of Christ. It is a renewing of our life. To celebrate the Eucharist, if we understand what the Eucharist really means, is that it renews us each time. It's not just a mechanical repetition. In many relationships, even sex can become a rather mechanical duty or repetition after a certain amount of time. And it's true, the Eucharist can become a rather mechanical, superficial and kind of rather unexciting routine. But if we are conscious of what is happening in the Eucharist, I think it is the opposite of a mechanical routine. It is a creative, life-giving renewal of the way we're living. So in a sense, like meditation, it sets a pattern for a way of life. It's not just an obligation you have to fulfill, once a week, or something that you become compulsive about and frightened about or guilty about, but it becomes a model, actually, of how you should be living during each day. The transformation of such a creative act, coming from a place we cannot really know, and where the words mine or my or his or hers or yours have a quite different meaning. This transformation happens in our whole being, and we become more whole as it unfolds. It's a process. The human being is a compound of different dimensions, highly calibrated, complex and miraculous, of body, mind and spirit. There's no computer program that can come anywhere near equaling the subtlety, the complexity and the beauty of human existence. And it is through these three dimensions of our consciousness that we are able to experience this transformation through the gift of self that we receive from God. In a sense, we could say, using Christian language, we are connecting to the three aspects of the divine being that we call Father, Son, and Spirit through these three dimensions of our own humanity: body, mind, and spirit. God's act of creation from that mysterious place within himself, like the place where Leonard Cohen writes his poems, God's act of creation is identical with God's own being. It's not something that God does and then takes a break. The being of God and the self-giving of that being is the act of creation. And we can go back as far as, in material scientific terms, to the moment of the Big Bang. Before that, we cannot imagine or investigate anything. It's like it's a horizon of our knowledge at the moment, anyway. But we know that that act of creation is continuing, that the world, the universe, continues to evolve and indeed to expand. It's the physical, the bodily aspect of creation. But there is another stage in the evolution, what the New Testament calls a new creation. And it is such a radical evolution that it can be spoken of in those terms as if it were a renewal of creation, because it is such an evolutionary leap. A new creation happening when a self gives itself to another self. When God is able to give himself not just to the mountains and the seas and the animals, but to a conscious, godlike, or becoming godlike, human being. So this is where things begin to start moving. This is where things become really interesting. But we have to be the person, the creature to whom God makes this gift of self personally, has to be sufficiently mature to receive and respond to it. We have to be a certain age, humanly, psychologically speaking, before we're capable of relationship. We were talking about the horror of child abuse yesterday. And probably the psychological dynamic of that is that the abuser is unable to make relationships with other adults, and puts onto the child a totally insupportable and horrific gift of self, or tries to make a gift of self that is obscene because it is incapable of receiving it. So, in evolutionary terms, the human race has to be sufficiently mature to receive this gift of God's self. Now, if the human being longs to be able to make this gift to another human being, and is incomplete until that exchange has happened, till you have learned how to love, then why shouldn't this, from our point of view, not be a sign of what actually is happening in God? That God, the source of creation, this place where it all happens, God also longs to be able to give himself. And there's a passage in the Gospel actually where Jesus says, "How I have longed to celebrate this meal with you." Despite the fact he knows it's his last meal. But he has longed to come to this moment where this gift of self can be given. You can't anticipate it, you can't be impatient about it, it has to come at the right moment. Just as you can't force someone to love you, you can't force yourself on someone. Now the Holy Spirit is the catalyst, or the agency that makes us capable of receiving this gift. It's as if, to use a computer analogy, you can't open the Jesus file, fully anyway, without the program of the Holy Spirit. And the downloading of this program takes time, as we all know when we get impatient waiting for things to download on our computer. And often you have to shut down other applications when this download happens. You get a bit irritated. So why do I have to close down Word in order to download Adobe or something? But you have to do it, otherwise it won't work. You have the whole computer has to be concentrated upon this, for the time being, upon this particular downloading. So, when we meditate, we are, in a sense, downloading the Holy Spirit, and we have to let go, we have to shut down the other mental applications that we rely upon most of the time, of thinking, of language, and of imagination. So, this brings us back to that moment in time which we recall and remember when Jesus says, "This is my body." And the more we reflect upon its meaning, the deeper that meaning becomes. The more it takes us into that place Leonard Cohen was speaking about, where we have no control, but where the act of creation is happening. The goal of human existence in the Christian vision is that we become divinized. God became human so that human beings might become God. It's the refrain of many of the early teachers of Christian doctrine. The purpose of all existence, the goal of all prayer as well, is the vision of God. The meaning of these events that we remember and become present to this evening, tomorrow, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and Easter Sunday. These have a meaning not only at the psychological or the anthropological level. Their meaning is found in this place over which we have no control, in other words, beyond the ego, and this place where the gift of self, the divine gift of self, is the act of creation in which we ourselves, each one of us, becomes a universe. Each one of us is a world. Each one of us participates in the cosmos, but each one of us is a world of our own as well. So it's from this place that the meaning arises. That means not only that the Eucharist is a mystical act, however badly or carelessly or superficially or formally it may be celebrated, in itself, if there is any element of faith in it, it is a mystical experience, because it arises from this core of our being, this place, which is a mystical communion, a place where we, in the act of our own creation, emerge from the loving gift of self that is God's being. Now, that means that we, at the core of our being, are all mystical. That's our hard drive. It's why we can all meditate. It's why children meditate so well. And when we speak about having a mystical core of our being, this means, and it's universal, this does not mean that we are going into ecstasy every time we sit down to meditate, or every time we look at a beautiful view, or that we are being absorbed into some higher realm and so on, and have phenomena of mystical experience. And in fact, the real mystics, who may, as they felt, unfortunately, have had those kind of experiences, they didn't want them. Look at Teresa. You compare St. John of the Cross, whose mystical experience was much more interior, and Teresa, who was levitating and flying around the room all the time and complaining to God that all of these unfortunate things were happening to her. So we have to be very careful when we use this kind of language, not to be stupid or superficial about what we mean by the mystical core of our being. It is not anything to do with those kind of experiences. That's why Father John says, and teachers in all traditions say, in meditation, don't look for anything to happen. And if anything happens of that kind, just ignore it. You're not going to sell many books by giving that teaching. But that is the best teaching you can get. What it means then, if we have this mystical core of our being, where the gift of God's self, in fact, is our creation, is what brings us into being, it means we are essentially spiritual beings on a human journey. We have become incarnate. Our body grows and develops. We are embodied psychologically and mentally and emotionally and spiritually in our bodies. We cannot imagine ourselves outside of a body or without a body. And indeed, we're told that we will always be embodied beings. That's what the resurrection means. Although the form of the body will cease to be a material form, like that bicycle, and it will become a spiritual body. No less a body, in fact even more of a body, or maybe an easier body, but it would no longer be identified with that physical form. If it is a body, if we remain in a body, embodied, then maybe it is still, even in the next stage of our evolution, through the body that we recognize each other. Although our bodies will no longer be limitations, our bodies will be forms of communion without any of the barriers or the glitches that we experience in the material realm. But that's just speculation. What awakens us to this potential and to our destiny? Well, in the Christian understanding, this decisive moment, this turning point of the evolutionary process is found in Jesus. This doesn't exclude the significance or the sacredness of any other great spiritual teacher or manifestation of the divine, but it does, if we view it in terms of Christian faith, it does change the grammar and the relationships between the different ways in which the divine mystery has manifested itself. But anyway, from the Christian point of view, this turning point of the evolutionary process is Jesus. And this awakens us to our potential and our destiny, his gift of self. His gift of self, humanly speaking, what we see happening here in the story of Holy Week, is an expression or a repetition, in a sense, in a human and worldly way, of the gift of self that brought about creation in the first place. So in that sense, it's a new creation. But it's a new creation focused not just upon the natural order, upon the beautiful mountains and skies and galaxies and mysterious creatures of the deep. So it's not a creation focused upon the natural world, as we call it, but upon our human existence. Whether or not we are the peak, well, we seem to be in some way the peak of this creation, whether there's anything else we don't know. This is what we have to work with. This is all we know. And it is all we need to know if we accept the gift. Jesus' gift of self, then, is the initiation of a new creation, not passively or just objectively, but intersubjectively. In other words, he can't give us his self unless we receive it. We've got to receive it. We have to have that program downloaded. And we download it in many different forms. This is my body. The body as a whole is the gift of self. And we cannot imagine, well, we perhaps can, but it's not a nice thing to imagine, the normal, healthy human being who throws his body or her body around indiscriminately. Somebody who has no respect for their body has no respect for themselves. Somebody who doesn't care, for example, who they sleep with at a party is probably suffering, from some damage to their sense of self or their sense of worth. And to be indiscriminate about how we use our body, maybe the risks we take with it or the abuse that we put on it, is a manifestation of a severe disorder within ourselves and our capacity to love ourselves, which is the basis of our capacity to love others. So the gift of one's body is a sacred gift, because it is the gift of oneself. And therefore, this gift of self that Jesus is showing and making through this, in this particular form, in this particular moment, which we repeat in the Eucharist tonight, is done through a body, his body. And we know from our own bodies and our complex and subtle relationship with our own bodies, or as embodied beings, that the body is a sacrament. The body is a sign and a symbol of everything we are, emotionally, intellectually, culturally, spiritually, as well as physically. So the Eucharist then, that we celebrate tonight in memory of that simple but profound gift of self, the Eucharist is a sacrament of a sacrament of the body that opens us to that place beyond our own control, beyond our own understanding, where we are already in communion.